I guess without further ado, let's jump into our discussion and recap. And if this is your first time watching us, we like to recap each episode of Critical Role before we dive into our proper discussion. And we actually cut that recap out and host it separately on YouTube for your convenience. So if you find yourself on that recap video and you want to hear our full thoughts, that will be linked down in the description below. So let's dive into it here. If I can pull up my notes. There we go. Okay. So this is episode 50 of Critical Role Campaign 3 Red Moon Rising. So
Feels like an anime
it
title or
does
something.
for sure. So we pick up with the crew, and it is the dawn of the final day, and it is time to plan. So as always, there's a bunch of back and forth on what should we do, what should we try. And one of the things they kind of ultimately land on is like, well, and this is something they've been thinking about, is this like bomb plan where they have this bomb they got from Mimahara Joe, and they're just gonna like crash it into the key. So they're like, we could do this, but we probably would need like cloud cover. And like, do we really want to be dependent on the weather? So as they're talking this out, they're like, well, let's go get Ira, the Nightmare King, and see what he brings to this equation. So they go and get him, and one of the first things they ask are like, you're old. Have you been part of these solstices in the past? And Ira's like, well, I have, but never in Exandria. Like I've been here for them, and I've utilized ones in the Feywild. And he's like, they bring about heightened magics, aberrations kind of can be born, and like unique mythological creatures actually will kind of show up or be born or what have you because of these types of solstices. Um, and Ira also like has this like long spyglass that he takes out, and he's kind of directing Xandis and the ship like which direction to go. And Fern actually pickpockets it from him, which will come up a bit later. Um, but so after talking to him a little bit, they're like, okay, we need basically a sky team and a ground team. And the sky team will be the ones that stay on the ship to basically, turn it into a bomb, while the ground team goes in and hopefully could maybe extract Plane Rider Rin. And they're trying to figure out who should be on what team, but ultimately they land on FCG and Fern being the ones to stay on the ship, with essentially everyone else being on the ground team. Um, Chetney at this point is like, we should make sure no one's like listening to our planning right now. And that kind of brings up Imogen's new circlet that she just bought last episode that kind of prevents being scryed upon. And they're like, do you think this prevents you from being dream scryed on? And they think so. And while they're talking about this, she actually realizes that for the first time, essentially in her adult life, she can
Right,
kind of, because she constantly has to block out all the voices, that because of
right.
the circlet, she can kind of let those walls down because the circlet's doing it for her. And it's a very like kind of freeing moment for her.
Yeah.
Um, Chet then goes and fills in Captain Xandis on their plan. And Xandis is essentially like, well, we got to make sure the crew and me get off. And they're like, well, who's going to pilot the ship? And so Fern basically is the one that's going to be piloting the ship for this bomb mission. And so Xandis decides to like give her the wheel for an hour to see how it goes. It doesn't go that well, but they figure they can hopefully make do. So they continue, and they actually park the ship really quick to let the majority of the crew off. Xandis does not get off yet. He's gonna keep piloting until a little bit later. During this time, Imogen sends a message to Keyleth, basically filling her in and kind of trying to get the plan together. And Keyleth says that she's gathering her able-bodied Ashari, and that Imogen needs to just let her know when they're ready, and she'll find a tree. But she's like, hey, just so you know, like our arrival won't be quiet, so like make sure it's time to go. So final preparations are made. Bell's Hells basically put on, half of them put on the Ruby Vanguard robes that they had gotten from that encounter. They also have a couple of Paragon's Call, like sets of armor, so they put those on too. They're basically getting, full up in their disguises for this infiltration. And Xandis then lands the ship to let off ground team, and Xandis also departs the ship in this moment and, basically wishes them all luck. And Bell's Hells, Sky Team and Ground Team basically wish each other luck, kind of
Yeah.
say their goodbyes,
I
but
don't
not
know,
in like
man.
a not in
Yeah.
like a morbid way.
Yeah.
And one kind of cool moment during this portion is Ashton tries to pickpocket Fern, but is unsuccessful. Like she totally notices that that's what's happening, and she asks like, "What were you looking for?" And Ashton says that they were looking for something personal and irreplaceable, and she gives him a kiss. So
Mhm.
a nice little moment.
Yeah.
So the ground team, which is again everyone except for FCG, Fern, and Ira, are on a crawler making their way to the excavation site. Um, and they go as far as they can on the crawler because it's kind of loud, and then they park it and continue on foot. And they notice something up ahead, so Chetney goes to scout by himself, and he finds this wreckage of a skyship, which they come to, basically figure out that it is a skyship from Vasselheim that actually had a cathedral on it. And he reports back to the crew after investigating a bit and, seeing that the ship was like shot down and there was like combat that took place on it. And they're like, maybe we should reevaluate our plan because clearly they have defenses in place to deal with skyships if they
Mhm.
took down this Vasselheim one. So they want to message the Sky team, but they decide, well, let's keep going, get some more information so we don't have to waste too many message spells, but we will definitely tell them that later. So they keep going. They start to see an encampment in the distance, and they have made it to basically the edge of the excavation site. And Laudna has pulled out the scrying orb that she has with the Odahan ring, and she can see that it's like pointing
Yeah.
downward toward the bottom of the pit. So like they're definitely coming to it, and they can see people. And a crawler actually comes by them, but with a successful deception check, and the fact that they're wearing these disguises, the crawler keeps going. But then they make their way to these actual tents where there's people and actually like a really large automaton. And once again, they get stopped. And Imogen says, we're here with Miss Timmelt, aka her mother. She makes a pretty strong deception check. But there is a member amongst this camp that like recognizes some of the crew. And we figure out that this person is from the fight that Bell's Hells had in Eos in the basement,
Mhm.
where they were pretending to have an orgy. So that's that same fight. And so they kind of have analysis paralysis set in because they're trying to do the deception check, but clearly like the members of the Ruby Vanguard aren't just like completely taking it. Imogen even says like, "Oh no, they're double agents. Like, don't worry, don't ask any more questions. Oh, like we gotta go." Um, and instead of just sitting in the analysis paralysis of like, what should we do? They kind of know what's going on. Travis just has Chetney wolf out and just start attacking them. And that's actually where we go to break for the first half.
Yeah, so in the second half, a large portion of it is combat, and it's basically the ground team versus these Ruby Vanguard and what's called a warder, which is this large mechanical construct. I honestly, if you've played Kingdom Hearts, it reminds me of like the really big, fat mechanical bad guys.
Yes.
So they had this pretty cool action figure for the combat. And they're basically fighting in the middle of this sort of like cover of sandstorm with like these two tents nearby. So again, just keeping in how we typically describe combat, I'll hit like the highlights of it. The one of the Ruby Vanguard mages is going to try to do paralysis on the party, and only Ashton's going to fail the roll, so he's going to be paralyzed. But a quick attack from Chetney is going to break his concentration and will free up Ashton for the remainder of combat. Other than that, the warder's going to pick up one of the tents and throw it at Ashton, but doesn't do too much damage. And basically, as they take down the mages one by one, which is actually fairly easy for the party, they begin to combine their attacks on the large mechanical construct, this warder. They're doing like electric damage, like shocking grasp, things like that. There's a really cool moment from Imogen where she casts command, which I think Laura Bailey gets like the award for using commands like consistently through a campaign so
Yeah.
well. But she uses command and tells the warder to grovel. And the warder, I think, rolled like a natural 2 and then has to go prone, basically, which is a massive advantage for the party. And then also, not to mention that Laudna has casted Bane at a higher level to apply Bane to all of the opponents in this combat session. Other than that, they end up taking down the warder, but not before Chetney climbs on its back and considers climbing down into this sort of suit of armor that comprises the warder. and is very glad that he didn't because the warder opens up its chest and blows fire across the entire party. All that to say, they defeat it. It sort of crumples down into a heap of metal. And the party's kind of like, we did it, yay. When all of a sudden, Imogen is sort of pulled into the remaining tent and pulled behind like some crates or barrels within the tent. And immediately hears a voice, someone who's basically like, what are you doing? Like, why are you fighting the Vanguard? And Imogen can't see this person, but she is like, hey, we're on the same team. Like, what's going on? And in an amazing moment, I think, especially for people who watch Campaign 2, this person is revealed to be Beauregard, who also nods and reveals the presence of another figure, a certain Caleb, who drops invisibility. And they're pretty much like, who are you? And it's just an awesome moment. I mean, the cast is seeing like their old characters, and Beauregard has some lines where everyone is kind of like, oh yeah, that's Beau. But it's sort of like cracking her knuckles, and she's like jacked. But basically, the party comes down into the tent, and they have a conversation on like what's happening here. And Beauregard and Caleb are like, "Yeah, this has been part of a 10-year journey of following the Cerberus Assembly, and for better or worse, the other members of the Assembly have really avoided getting involved with what Ludinus is up to. Maybe intentionally, maybe they don't want to be a part of it." Beau mentions other mages that they've beat up and taken care of, kind of joking that like we can handle Ludinus, but also mentions that Ludinus has gotten really sloppy over the recent time period that they've been following him, almost too sloppy, almost that he wants to sort of be sloppy for some reason. Other than that, they reveal that when Bell's Hells mentions that they took out the key in the Feywild, Beau and Caleb reveal that they had come here with Planesrider Ren. They knew about Ren getting captured, but more importantly, they were part of the Shadowfell team that went to go destroy the Shadowfell key. They weren't successful. They did damage it heavily, and unfortunately, some of the members of the party that they were with, who they describe as being members of the Grim Verity, were unfortunately lost in combat. So, coming from the Shadowfell, here they are now to hopefully take care of Ludinus. The party asks, why haven't you sort of snuck inside? And they're like, well, we don't want to die, which I don't know what that says about the dangers of sneaking into the heart of this excavation site. But they also sort of swap notes on Bell's Hells mentions their airship plan. And Beau says, well, there is a big sandstorm, so maybe it could work. And mentions the other airship and confirms that it was from Vasselheim that got destroyed. All that to say, they kind of agree, this could be a good distraction mutually. They decide, you know what, why don't we split up if we can and see if we can sort of create a distraction that sort of splits their forces. And other than that, it's just sort of like wait for their signal. During this time, there is another crawler that comes by and sees like the crumpled mess of the warder. Imogen, I think, has like a deception 20 to basically say like, oh, it's malfunctioning, we're working on it. And the people in the crawler are like, this old stuff never works anymore, things like that. Other than that, it's still on the brink of the Apogee Solstice, and we end the session there with the parties splitting up and Imogen deciding to message FCG and sort of update the air crew on what's been happening. Very exciting second half to the episode, and that is what happened in episode 50, Red Moon Rising. I want to say like in a Scottish Red Rising. That's what I keep thinking of.
Good book, by the way.
Yeah. So,
So
anyhow,
yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say what you're going to say. If you're checking out just the recap, click the link for our full discussion on the episode. And yeah. So my friend Will, what'd you think?